Alrighty, happy Sunday. Thank you for being here. We are here with Patricia Kaishian, who is the author of our November book, Forest Euphoria, The Abounding Queerness of Nature. And Patricia is the curator of mycology at the New York State Museum, as well as faculty with the Bard Prison Initiative. She earned her PhD from SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry. Beyond more traditional scientific work, she also works in the realms of philosophy of science, ecofeminism, queer ecology, and queer theory, exploring how mycology and other scientific disciplines are situated in and informed by our socio-political landscape. She lives in the Hudson Valley. Welcome, Patricia. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Nina. Thanks for having me. And thank you to everyone who's here spending the time with us, both in real time and maybe watching this in the future. So appreciate your attention and interest in my work.
Well, congratulations on your debut book that you can hold, flip through. This is a huge labor of love. So, congrats on that. I'd
Thank
love
you.
to know what the publishing process was for you because in the arc, we have a letter from the editor, Joey, who talks about it kind of seems like they found you. And is that the case? Tell us about that and your writing and compilation process, because I know you've been writing for other publications for a very long time.
Yeah, Joey did find me. So Joey McGarvey is my editor, and I'm at Spiegel and Grau, the publisher. At the time, though, when we first connected, she was working at Milkweed Press, which had been on my radar because of the very beloved book Braiding Sweetgrass was published by them, and they also have a lot of wonderful nature writing and poetry. So when I had been, this was, I guess, spring of 2022, I had been doing a lot of science communication and sort of talks and podcasts related to my like a variety of aspects of my work, but I think there was a lot of interest in this academic paper I had published called The Science Underground: Mycology as a Queer Discipline, and that was like written as a theory text. That's something I worked on during my PhD in mycology, but I had kind of done it as a self-directed project outside of I didn't have like formal advising on this paper, but I was sort of giving talks on the subject of like looking at mycology as a way of as like sort of a case study for understanding queerness in nature, both in this like literal reproductive sense, but also in sort of a more theoretical and abstract sense. And so I'd done a podcast for the Wild, which is a really wonderful nature podcast, and Joey had heard me speaking on that podcast about this subject, and she reached out to me and was like, "Have you ever thought about writing a book?" And I I've always loved reading and writing, and I've really sort of thought that as a scientist, one of my strengths was like writing, but I didn't have a very like concrete plan to write a book. It was sort of like, oh, maybe one day that's something I might like, but I wasn't didn't fully like understand like what would be my first step in that process. So when I heard from Joey, I was immediately like, oh my God, this is really exciting. And I was like, okay, yes, I have thought about it, even though it wasn't in a super concrete way. And she agreed to meet, and then we sort of just started talking and digesting possible ideas for of what the book could be. So that did kind of come into fall into my lap in a way that I know is like a little bit unusual. But yeah, I felt very like the timing was right. So the next sort of step was I knew I wanted it to be about queerness and nature. And I obviously, as a mycologist, knew that fungi would be a big part of it. But I knew that there was like a bigger story here in terms of all of the queerness that exists in nature across the entire tree of life. So I knew that fungi would be a big part of this story, but there are so many other like fantastic examples that I wanted to bring in. Um, I would say that like the hardest part for me in the process of like both drafting and even like conceptualizing was like kind of deprogramming myself from all of my academic training. So I have like, a PhD in science. So there's this like science writing training that I have, which is, I think, really a useful skill, but it is not necessary. Like you have to work with that to bring a piece of writing to a general audience. You can't just like write like a scientist. And, I have a tendency to want to cite every single thing I say and like kind of be like really like logically like laying out arguments.
Yeah.
And I think that can come into the writing in a strong way. Obviously, like I don't like the notes section. If you read the physical copy of the book
Oh
is
yeah.
quite long.
It's like 20, 30, 40 pages. I don't even know
Yeah.
how many, but it's a good chunk.
It's a good chunk. Yeah. I couldn't resist that. But yeah, so I had to sort of like study the craft of like short stories and essays, like including drawing from like works of fiction as like as inspiration. And so that was probably like the most like challenging part for me because I just hadn't ever had any formal training in writing creatively. But it was also like the most fun part of it for me because I like could step out of the more like constrained scientific writing style and like be like expressive and poetic and lyrical and then bring also myself as a narrator into the story. So like in science also you're trained to like kind of be almost like remove yourself to be as objective as possible, which makes sense in the scientific context. But like in this form of writing, like through many drafts with between Joey and I, like more and more my sort of person came through in the narrative. So I didn't set out necessarily actually to write kind of a memoir. And that just ended up being, to me, the most compelling way to connect some of these themes and bring them to life.
Yeah, no, I mean, hybrid memoir, I maintain is the gayest form of writing.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's one of my favorites to read, like blending that academic content and making it accessible through personal experience. And the kind of non-linearity, if is that a word? I don't even know.
I think
But
so.
so Sophia in the chat says like that they love the science part and it felt very accessible. And I totally agree. You really made it an approachable subject because I mean, I was an English girly in school. I was never a
Mhm.
science girly, but the fact that you could blend them both into something where I'm like, oh, this is like really, really fun to digest.
Thanks.
Um,
Yeah, I appreciate
yeah. And in your chapter of fungal personhood, you talk about the sort of demonization of mushrooms in our culture. But I feel like in the last few years, mushrooms have kind of really resurfaced as this symbol of like the cottagecore aesthetic.
it.
Um, but like from playing as Toad in Mario Kart to watching The Last of Us, there's really a wide range of mushroom depictions in media today. And admittedly, I'm not the biggest fan of eating them cuisine-wise. It's a neurodivergent texture thing. I have nothing against them. Um,
That's
but
fair.
recreationally and magically, I'm very obsessed with them. I mean, one of my favorite activities is to take mushrooms and then go to the aquarium. It is fantastic for anyone on the
Incredible
call
plan.
who has
Yeah.
never done it. Um, I'm really curious about how your experience with psychedelics and magic mushrooms informed your career as a mycologist. And I saw that you talked about The Last of Us in an article, and I would just love
Yeah,
more thoughts there. But let's talk about
sure.
psychedelics first.
Okay, so starting with the psychedelics. Yes, so I have found what I call it, psychedelic medicine, has been really an important formative part of my life. I started using them as a like in my late teens, and I found that they were very affirming of a lot of things that I think I had kind of an inherent knowledge of, but like, like there's a lot of layers of social conditioning that everyone has to sort of sort through, like what's your true knowledge and what you've been conditioned to believe. And I felt that, like, for example, my relationship to nature was something I talk about in the book as being like a very early childhood core element of my personhood. And also a sacred and sort of um, psychologically safe place for me as a survivor of early childhood trauma.
Yeah.
So I had nature was always this place for me to be like my fullest self, to feel very safe, to feel kind of at like peace in my own body. And I held on to that throughout my whole life. But there's sometimes you go through phases where that's more like I had phases in my teenage years where like that was less present in my life than it is now and it was earlier. But like the consumption of mushrooms was very helpful in kind of bringing me back into that relationship, keeping that relationship at the fore of my sort of sense of self and my daily practices. So like mushrooms, to be more explicit, like when taking them, my relationship to nature was clearly the most important thing
Mhm.
in my life, like that, and it would remind me of that. And also to make me feel, it brought me this like this sort of same sense of peace and like camaraderie that I would feel as a child, but just sort of dialed up almost to the point where it like makes you have like that childlike wonder that as an adult kind of slips away, kind of makes that accessible again. So I've just been a regular consumer of those for over a decade now, but usually in just not many times per year, but just a couple times per year,
Yeah.
usually by myself and usually out in the forest. As a way of sort of centering, a way of like reconnecting, to making sure I'm in like sort of my like there's a uniformity with my like my values, my behaviors, my actions, sort of doing like an accounting of what's important to me. Am I accessing that in a way that I feel really good about? Or what ways, am I not, maybe have I like lost something that I need to like re-strengthen? So they're very powerful though. They're very intense, and I don't like think of them as like recreational. I think of them
Mm.
as sort of like important, like as like to do sort of like some sort of psychological work. Not
Yeah.
that, and this is not prescriptive. People can have a different relationship to them. But for me, it's sort of like, well, what needs tending, and to be kind of and to take a sort of serious approach to them, but also like be up for lightheartedness, which can also, and euphoria that of course can also come with an experience like that. So I do recommend them. I also urge, or of course, urge
Yeah.
appropriate caution. But yeah, I think they're very powerful, and they definitely I wouldn't say they made me a mycologist per se, but like they reinforced the choices all along the way. It's like,
Yeah.
yes, this is what brings you joy. This is what like is consistent with your values. This is like how you can best like apply yourself in this life. So
It's interesting that you use the word euphoria. Is that where the title came from? Forest Euphoria?
it's definitely part of it. I feel like there's so many layers to the choice.
Yeah.
Obviously, like most like explicitly, there's a reference. It's trying to evoke like a gender euphoria,
Mm.
which I would feel in my relationship to nature, where because I have a fluid relationship with my gender. And it changes, like my exact kind of concept of it changes all like kind of frequently, but so like, but when I'm in nature, there is like it's almost like I can transcend any sort of feeling of what like being stuck, like, right, that it doesn't like for me it doesn't really matter what my relationship with gender is, because all of it is like part of nature, right? Everything, like there's so many ways in which you can be a living organism. Um, and then also, but yes, also certainly like the like experiences of consuming mushrooms is part of it. And then just sort of the joy that I find in nature, apart from sort of my self-perception. So there's like all these different, yeah, layers to it.
I love that. And what about The Last of Us? What are your
Oh
thoughts
yeah.
on the mushroom virus?
Yeah, so The Last of Us is a great show, and I played the game a bit when it was like before the show came out, and that was really fun too. But I like this show because it's cool and it's well done. Although the last season I was a little disappointed in,
Yeah.
but but before that, but I was like, into it. So this is not to try to dismiss the whole show, but what obviously is driving the plot is like mycophobia, right? The word we have to describe the sort of universal, well, sort of culturally broad fear of mushrooms. That's very present in like Euro-American culture. It's not like cultures all over around the world. There are many cultures around the world that have like we would call a mycophilia, just sort of a general
Yeah.
appreciation and love of mushrooms. But like the Western Europe and England in particular, sort of British culture, and then like the way that has affected American culture is very mycophobic, and that means that there's this sort of, instead of seeing fungi as like a super dynamic kingdom that can sure be pathogenic and cause disease, and some are poisonous, but are also like life-giving and medicinal and sort of beautiful and complex and essential to ecosystem functioning. So instead of seeing them in all of their dynamic, range, they're just seen as these things that need to be like eliminated and destroyed. And if we don't destroy them, they will destroy us. And that's sort of what drives the plot of The Last of Us, right? And even in the opening credits, there's this like panoply of like fungal like
Yeah.
organisms, and but many of like one of the key organisms moving across visually in that credits is a slime mold. Actually, it's not even a fungus. It's something that was called like, admittedly, we used to classify them as fungi, but for many decades now, we've understood that they're not fungi, that they're amoebas. So even in like, so like in the opening credits, like striving to be fungal, they're actually including something that's not fungal. But it kind of goes to show that there's like not really true discernment when it comes to fungi about like which one
Yeah.
is which and what is this one doing, and but it's all like all bad, all scary, all gross and disgusting, right? Um, so I think that in the last few years there has been an uptick of public interest in mycology, and it's kind of wild for me to witness because I started studying mushrooms in 2010. And
Mhm.
so for the first 10 years of studying them, like and when I was writing, for example, this paper, Mycology as a Queer Discipline, the perception was just very negative,
Yeah.
outside of like mycologists essentially, and then some other weird little people that were interested in, like little groups of people that were interested in them. But they so like I would say that I credit a few different things for this like rise in popularity, but like I think COVID for one brought people outside a lot more because
Yeah.
everything else was shut down. So I saw like a general rise in interest in like foraging and
Yeah.
going to parks, going to national parks, um, van life kind of culture. All these sort of cultural things were popping up in that setting. And like there was also a book called Entangled Life that came out that was very popular and that kind of brought like some good press to fungi. So there has been a shift, but it's only, it's this shift is very new compared to the hundreds of years of scientific neglect that the,
Yeah.
the kingdom has been experiencing. And there's still so few mycologists, so few mycological jobs, and so little research on this group. So it hasn't, it's not enough time to like sort of materially translate to like a renaissance in fungal biology.
Well, one job that you should be hired for is a consultant on The Last of Us to make sure
Yeah,
that
that's a great
fungi are
idea.
actually in their intro. That's so
Yes, I would love, well, yeah, I'm open to consulting jobs.
I also have to ask about religious trauma
Hmm.
because I was raised very religious, and every single author who comes on that even like slightly mentions being raised religious, I'm like, let's talk
Yeah.
about it. And your chapter about the swamp and your grandfather was so moving to me because I actually grew up in the middle of a forest
Oh,
in
wow.
Connecticut, and my childhood was spent by the creek, like traipsing over rocks and,
Yeah.
I mean, you get it. Like
Yeah.
that was my backyard. And but then there was also church all the time.
Hmm.
And I just would love to know how your relationship to nature and like mycology has it like healed or informed your relationship to religion and like healed any kind of religious trauma in
Hmm.
any way? I'm super curious about that.
It's a really good question, and I appreciate you asking about it. And I also like find that this is such a particular way to connect to people. Like if you understand this, it means there's like so many layers to it. So it inevitably
Yeah.
means you understand a lot of things about each other just
Yeah.
off the bat. But yeah, I think that I don't know if it's healed. My relationship to nature has healed those like sort of wounds.
Hmm.
I would say that it's certainly like where I turn to when I'm hurting from them.
Yeah.
I think that much like the psychedelics have helped with that.
Yeah.
Maybe as much or like in maybe like slightly more surgical ways than like sort of the general relationship to nature. Like I think like like bound up in for me, my like sort of religious traumas is my like the childhood abuse I experienced. Those had happened in the context of a religious school. So those are like practically
Yeah.
impossible to disentangle. And so I know that like psychedelics has helped me deal with sort of the trauma of that abuse. The religious thing is a little bit more complex in some ways because of the active relationships that I have with family members who are actively Catholic, who I love and care about. Um, so it's like, whereas I don't have any contact with the person who is involved in the abuse. So like that is almost more like a time and a place, but the religion thing is still
Yeah.
very
Like
like
ongoing and
uh,
present.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I think it's like harder to just fully, and then like I can't really I don't want to distance myself from
Yeah.
the people I love, because they're so, like that's not what that, yeah, I love them. But there is unfortunately this kind of constant reminder of that whole space, in my relationships with them. Um, so I would say that like what I haven't replaced the role of like being Catholic in my life. Like I haven't like sort of take like redirected and like applied the same sort of intensity or like sort of structure to
Fervor.
anything else. Like nothing has taken its place. I've just tried
Yeah.
to dismantle its role in my life, and I don't
Mm,
know, like metabolize it and digest it and stuff. But I would say that like I have been in like it's taken me time to it kind of process that my relationship to nature is sacred,
yeah.
and to be fully okay with like that language even.
Yeah.
And I think that that increasingly is like healing to me, just like being like leaning and not to like apply particular formats to it, just like this sort of general idea that this is like these things can like I can't, because I think part of it's also this tension with my scientific training, right? Like maybe like I think I wanted to be an atheist after I dissolved my relationship to Catholicism, but that didn't actually work for me. Like there is something in me that like sort of fundamentally believes that there in something animate, and like vital beyond what we can like the material world, I guess.
No,
So I don't know. This is me. I'm really meandering here.
no,
I'm not totally
I
sure.
I
Yeah.
love meanderings. I love
Okay.
tangents. That's highly encouraged here. And I thank you for sharing because that is like so incredibly relatable to me and like the desire for like the kind of night and day relationship. Like you were so entrenched in one thing, and it's like that desire to be an atheist once you kind of deconstruct the organized
Hmm.
religion of it all. But and like I definitely feel that uncomfortability with spirituality and spiritual language, but I
Yeah.
still feel that kind of pull and those feelings. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah,
It's
but
complicated.
I think a lot of conversations about nature that I see now is like nature is church and I find God in the soil and the
Hmm.
trees and like and this kind of sense of worship in nature, which
Hmm.
doesn't always resonate with me, but I just really appreciated how you talked about it in that chapter. So thank
Thank
you for
you.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I also, yeah, I don't tend to just say it outright like that. And it's not because it's not really how I feel.
Yeah.
But at the same time, um, it's not that I don't feel that way. I don't know, like
No,
it,
no,
like
I
there,
know. Yeah,
yeah,
it's
yeah.
yeah, I think applying those kind of like really charged words to something that is sacred in a different way sometimes for me doesn't translate.
I think that's right. I think it's to
Yeah.
me, it's almost similar to like when people be like, I don't believe in God, I believe in the goddess, and it's
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
and it's like, I don't know, like it's just to me, just translocating like the same stuff
Yeah.
onto a different kind of conception of it. So yeah, yeah, I think I'm just trying to be in a different like kind
Yeah,
of
there's like a
type of
secret
relationship.
third thing that we can
Hmm.
like it doesn't have to be in this like kind of black and white language.
Yes, I think, yeah, we're hitting
Yeah.
on the same note here.
But I think my favorite chapter of yours is honestly Purple Love,
Oh yeah.
in which you're challenging Darwinian theory of natural selection through examples of beauty like the bowerbird. And I didn't know what the bowerbird was until there was actually a Sapph-Lit book pick called Sirens and Muses by Antonia
Uh,
Negress. Highly recommend you read it. I think you would love it. And it mentions the bowerbird through
oh.
an artistic lens. And for me, like the bowerbird, ever since I read that, I'm like, oh, that makes sense in how I arrange my home, kind of like how you described in your book. I lived alone for over 6 years. I've moved 8 times in the over 10 years I've lived in New York City.
Oh wow.
And the first thing I always do in a new apartment is arrange my knickknacks, hang up my art, create a gallery wall. Like it doesn't feel like home until that's done.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
And I'd love to know if there are some items in your home that if you had to start fresh, like what are your first bowerbird items that you need to put away in their place?
Yeah, so I've also moved a lot, and so I know exactly what you're talking about. And I have like a little box, every time I'm moving, I'm packing up like these little
Mhm.
things, and they're usually like just an assortment of stones and skulls. Like I have a lot of skulls that I have personally found myself in the woods. Mostly deer skulls, but also like other small mammals. Actually, I also did find an enormous like bull skull on the streets in Brooklyn.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so I don't know what its origin was, but I did pick that up. So that's the only thing I didn't find in the woods. But otherwise, it's like so it's those things, and then so my but the skull has always been the bull skull always goes like somewhere very prominent in the house. And then I have like an assortment of dried mushrooms and like lichens and things that I've had for like like several decades. And then also I think with so those things and then my house plants. I have a lot of house plants. And I've had some of them for like 15 years, so
Yeah.
they're very precious to me and very big. Some of them are
Yeah.
huge.
No,
Um,
I love that.
yeah, so those things like if my plant my sorry, if my house was devoid of those plants and those little like that little is basically a box that I then arrange, I would it would be very disorienting.
Yeah. The first thing that I bought for my first apartment that I lived alone in New York was a money tree.
Uh-huh.
And I moved in like over a year before COVID hit. And when COVID hit, I went to stay with my parents in Boston for a while. And I had so many houseplants. And I was like, I can't bring them all, but I'm going to bring this one money tree.
Uh-huh.
And that money tree is now upstairs in this apartment, and it's 10 times the size
Oh,
of
amazing.
what it once was. Like I've had like UPS drivers be like, "That's a nice plant," when they see through my window. So I
Cool.
love that answer. And speaking of Darwin, this book definitely further revealed that sort of tension that you were talking about earlier between traditional science and the abundance of queerness that's present in nature. One story that I thought of when I was reading this, which I'm sure you've heard of. It's a NPR Radio Lab episode about gay seagulls.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and in the 70s and how they like wrote this whole paper, but it was like so rejected by the science community at the time. And science is often used as reinforcement of homophobia. Phrases like,
Hmm.
it's not natural, and the birds and the bees, and it's not found in nature are
Right.
like it justifies discrimination against us as queer people. So I'm wondering if you could give this book to someone and have them really internalize what you're trying to say here,
Hmm.
who would you give it to? And you can have multiple people, but I'm really interested to know who comes to mind.
That's interesting. I mean, the first person who comes to like, okay, this was the second person who comes to mind, but I think is the better answer. So there's this evolutionary biologist who I've feuded with. His name is Jerry Coyne. I'll say his name. I don't
Yeah,
care.
period.
He's a professor emeritus at the University of Chicago. I think he has me blocked on all on Twitter at least. I deleted my account actually on Twitter once it became
Yeah,
X.
heard.
So stupid. But whatever. So we got into a little scrum. I have he wrote a book called Why Evolution is True, and it was a sign when I was a TA in for an evolution class and during my PhD, um it was like assigned reading to those students, and it's a pretty good book. Like it's actually a decent like example of like just like really plain like language around like what is evolution and why, like kind of like, because if you like, I feel like this now seems like sort of quaint given all of our political dramas, but like there was a time where like teaching evolution in schools was one of the bigger like culture wars.
Yeah,
I mean
absolutely.
that's still like obviously a sort of conflict that exists, but like I feel like that has faded to the background as things have just gotten like crazier
Crazier.
and crazier. Yeah.
Yeah.
But for a while, like that was like a scientist would talk about that a lot, as you know, like creationism and that and the
Yeah.
intelligent design debate and all of that stuff was like very animating to a lot of scientists of that of like the older generation.
Hmm.
Anyway, so he wrote that book with like kind of that in mind. And so this is like, sorry, this is like a really like a bit of a tangent, but
I love tangents. Keep
okay,
going.
so on Twitter, MC Hammer. Yeah, so
Okay.
is he had his on his account he would talk a lot about philosophy and like science, and he would talk, he would have these like really funny like kind of thoughtful like threads about and riffs, and like was really interested, like was being really like scholarly though, like really interested in like talking about particular books that he'd been reading and like and like science and all sorts of stuff, and it was pretty like entertaining and
That's
like
so funny.
yeah, and so he in some sort of post that he wrote, he uses the word like design. He
Mm.
wasn't being a creation. He wasn't
No, yeah,
espousing
but it's
creationist.
the association is there.
Yeah, so he said something about like the like you look at the design of an like an eyeball, and you're
Mm.
like, wow, like how did this possibly happen? You know, like that kind of thing. And so maybe like Jerry had like alerts set on his like Twitter or something to like for the word design, but in any case, he jumps in on the thread and says and is like just so disgustingly condescending, and like it was so like gross, and it to me it kind of smacked of like there were layers to it. It felt racial. It felt
Yeah.
just so condescending, but also just like wholesale, like throwing at like not. It was also not strategic because it was just very alienating of someone who's really thinking about these things and is not actually just spewing nonsense.
Yeah.
Um, so I replied to Jerry on the MC Hammer thread, and I said, Dr. Coyne, I've read your book, and actually, if you want to be very particular about language, you said in the first chapter of your book, you quoted Darwin and talked in which Darwin refers to indigenous people as savages, and the quote is like something to the effect of like, at, like understanding evolution is like, or like or understanding like the form of an animal without understanding evolution is probably like how savages felt when they looked upon a ship or something. It was something like this. So he was
Yeah, 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 yeah.
so Jerry quotes Darwin, but doesn't then he just leaves that in there and doesn't is not he's not critical of Darwin's
Yeah.
clear like racism and stuff. So I would whatever. I was like if I was like Jerry, if you want to be really particular about language, like you should probably be more like thoughtful about what Darwin quotes you're using or something like that. And then he blocked me on everything. And then I found his blog and it's really deranged, like and it's very like anti-woke, like screeds, like
Oh
real,
my God.
and there he like and like very anti-trans and whatever. So all of this to say, I don't think Jerry would appreciate my book. I don't think he would read it. But if I could somehow like force him
Force
to
him to consume it.
absorb the message and integrate the message into his thinking, I would do that to him. Yeah, I would
Yeah, like put a helmet on
yeah,
him,
I would
like
MK
one of those
Ultra him.
futuristic. Yeah, exactly. That is such a funny story. I had no idea MC Hammer contains such multitude.
I know. I really enjoyed that one. When you delete your account from different media platforms, there's always some things you miss,
Yeah,
and that's one
absolutely.
thing I miss. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so fair. Okay, this is sort of a silly, stupid question, but I
Okay.
have to ask it because when I read Cemetery Crows, my first thought was Dick Cheney. Have you heard of so my dad, not a Republican.
Okay.
And he told me some urban legend that Dick Cheney was once really mean to a crow during golfing, and then anywhere Dick Cheney went, he was attacked by crows.
Wait.
I don't think this is true, but I Googled it in preparation for this interview, and I found that there was a study from the University of Washington, Seattle, where scientists there in 2006 wore masks of Dick Cheney's face and caught crows in nets to tag them and thus created an almost 20-year generational grudge with Dick Cheney's face. So anytime the scientists wore the mask, they were attacked by crows. And I think this somehow got back to Dick Cheney himself. Now, I'm a Libra, I'm a grudge holder. I
Yes.
admire crows so deeply, and
Yes.
I just want to know what your thoughts are on
Okay.
this.
This is incredible stuff. First of all, rest in piss to Dick Cheney. Like,
Hmm.
uh, I I am very well aware of this study, and I knew about the masks, but I
Yeah.
never knew that they were Dick Cheney masks. So this is
Yes,
like
they are.
incredible. This is an incredible detail that should have been like the forefront of this story. This is a great story. This is an amazing story. Actually, after this talk, I'm going to a crow parade in Troy, where I live.
Don't wear a Dick Cheney mask. You'll
Yeah,
get
I will not be
attacked.
wearing it. I don't have, unfortunately, do not have one. Um, so I will, yeah, but well, okay, I will do what I can to look into this story
Yeah.
about that. But I know for sure it is a fact that crows form long-term relationships with people, with other species. Um, those really like either active like sort of friendships or like yeah, like sort of grudges or fear-based sort of anger at specific people, and they are able to recognize someone's face and somehow explain who someone is and their whether or not they're a friend or foe to their other members of their flock. So
I
that's for
don't
sure
think he's
true.
ever.
That's
Yeah.
definitely like been studied kind of extensively. Yeah. That's
I
amazing detail though. Wow.
please look into it and then
Yes.
DM or email me and I will report back to the Sapph-Liddies at large because
Okay.
I would love to know like what the science community thinks of this.
Okay. Yeah, that's incredible. Wow.
So also this year, another book that I read was Breeding Sweetgrass for the first
Hmm.
time. And I was so excited to see on the hardcover that Robin Wall Kimmerer blurbed your book. Huge
Yes.
congratulations on that.
Thank you. Very
I'd love,
excited. I was very
yeah,
excited.
yeah. And I mean, just the notion that we are a part of nature and not above and therefore can control it. was just really extremely powerful to me in reading it.
Hmm.
And I'd love to know what Indigenous practices you've brought to your mycology, and if you have any further reading recommendations of like Indigenous authors beyond Robin and Braiding Sweet.
Yeah. So I had the very one thing that was very special about where I did my PhD, which is SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry in Syracuse. That's where Robin Kimmerer is a professor.
Oh.
Yeah, and so she actually served on my PhD committee when I was doing my work in mycology, and when I was writing that paper, which wasn't directly like part of my formal research. She was very encouraging of writing, moving, like being critical of science, but also sort of use trying to push science to be better, to be more accountable to these ethical considerations, and to sort of investigate the ways in which science has been used to justify harm, right? And to be
Yeah.
and the way in which science is people strive to be objective, but really we always have social biases and kind of cultural lenses through which we view the world. And if we're not acknowledging that, then we're bound to sort of carry those biases forward in the scientific process. So she was really encouraging for me in writing that and sort of working outside of the bounds of traditional science. So also she co-founded the Center for Native Peoples and the Environment, which is based at ESF, and they had other tons of workshops and classes and just sort of opportunities to learn from other Indigenous scholars. So I just having that as a resource to me during that period of schooling was really formative, incredibly foundational to sort of my identity as a scientist. So it's hard to sort of just pick one thing, but I would say that um, to me it's just essential to understand. I think, well, okay, so let me back up for a second. I also am interested in my own, I talk about in the book about my identity as an Armenian person
Mhm.
who is displaced due to the Armenian genocide. And so I've always had this sort of feeling that at time, when I was younger, I had less of a capacity to articulate it, but now it's very clear to me that to be displaced, part of a tool of genocide is the destruction of land and the relationship to other species that the victims had or have, right? So that loss of sort of the place that your lineage was took shape in is really tremendous. So I definitely think and feel about that loss, and I work through grappling with that sort of in the writing. And so I also then, of course, reflect on the fact that I am not indigenous to this place, but I also have a tremendous relationship to it. So that there's a tension there.
Mm.
Um, and one thing that I found I think one of the things that was the most generous, one of the more generous, I can't totally make a hierarchy of it, but one very generous aspect of Robin's book, Braiding Sweetgrass, was this idea of becoming indigenous to place, right? That this sort of suggestion that anyone, despite where they come from, where their lineage is from, can cultivate a relationship to nature by being deeply committed to stewarding, to being in reciprocity.
Mm.
So I found that to be this I remember when I read that for the first time, just feeling so grateful that there was possibly this pathway in which it would be okay to feel as connected as I do in a less to the organisms around me, as someone who's not who is living in the after the post-apocalypse of settler colonialism.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that was that contribution to my thinking was very powerful. Um, that it doesn't make up for or erase the current indigenous relationships to nature, but it is sort of a pathway for those who are here, right? And so I think that this is hard to work through, I think, but whenever we organize, whenever we sort of are in our striving for a better world, you have to give people like a path, right? If you just make all their choices impossible, you will alienate people. People will feel too much shame. So you have to give people a way. Like, how do you want people to be? What are your goals? What is your strategic goal in like your organizing mission? Like, is it to get people to care about nature? Then maybe constant shame around their not being, really from here might be a obstacle to that, right? Especially when we talk about people who are refugees and displaced, and
Yeah.
I don't know, right? I'm sorry. I feel like I'm kind of I would like to have said this in a more concise way, but it's kind of
No,
where it's
that
going.
makes sense. And really am glad you talk about your Armenian heritage and the environmental side of genocide in the book
Hmm.
now. It really makes me think about Palestinians and their olive trees,
Hmm.
especially. And I'd love for you to talk more about your work as a founding member of the International Congress of Armenian Mycologists. And what do you wish, you know, non-Armenian Americans understood about Armenian history and culture, and how does it relate to mycology for you personally?
Yeah. So during 2020, there was a basically okay. So trying to think about how much backstory I should include. Okay, so Armenia is it's in West Asia, it's north of Iran, and to the east of Armenia is Azerbaijan, to the
Mhm.
west is Turkey, and north is Georgia.
Mhm.
So during the Armenian genocide, which was carried out by Ottoman Turks, most of Armenia was colonized by Turkey, what is present day Turkey. Historical Armenia like sort of span like it was quite large and actually kind of went into what like modern day Iraq and Syria and then like a lot into what is present day Turkey. So
Mhm.
when Turkey has never been held to account for the genocide. 1.5 million people are estimated to have been killed in that time. And it was only 20 years before the Holocaust. So it's not, it's not that much, it's not that long ago. And
Yeah.
particularly when you think about like how there has been no accountability, like it's when there is no accountability, like the trauma can just sort of continue to like
Yeah.
like can pass down generation to generation without much like without abating really because
Yeah.
it's just this constant reminder. Um, and recently there in 2020 there was a population of Armenians living in what Armenians call Artsakh, but it's also known as Nagorno-Karabakh, and it was been inhabited by Armenians for thousands of years, but like the borders were disputed during after the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And Azerbaijan was sort of like administered the that land, but
Um,
had but it had been indigenously Armenian for thousands of years. So
mhm.
Armenians stayed. They didn't want to be part of Azerbaijan, which is a Turkic. They're Turkic, and so there's been hostility from that group, for a long time now. And so that Armenians like fought to stay, and they established their own republic called Artsakh and a democratic society. And then basically there have been wars fought by Azerbaijan to reclaim that land or to claim that land. And eventually, and Armenians were able to fight them off. But in 2020, with weapons supplied by Israel, Azerbaijan laid siege to Artsakh and took over and then ethnically cleansed Artsakh entirely. Of all Armenian inhabitants were forced to flee. So like tens of thousands of Armenians were forced to flee. And now it is so entirely ethnically cleansed of Armenians. So this happened in 2020. Um, and then carried out so it began in 2020, and then like in 2023, September of 2023, it kind of was that cleansing was sort of finalized.
Yeah.
And so like in 2020, I was like very horrified by the aggression of Azerbaijan, and it activated a lot of generational like trauma to sort of see this happening, and then also just to the fact that it was really difficult to get anyone to notice or to care because it's happening in, to a lot of Americans, perception, it's just happening in this far away
Yeah.
like place that no one even knows about. No one even like people don't even know where Armenia is. They get confused with all like with like Albania all the time and other like Eastern European countries, but
Yeah.
it's not in Europe. It's
In Asia.
yeah. So it's like there's always you always have to explain all these things, and then by the time you're like on this third sentence of explaining it, people are like, often just eyes are glazing over.
Yeah.
So it was like very upsetting. And so but I'm like, I'm a scientist. What can I do? Like, so my friends and I, I have several Armenian mycology friends in the U.S., which seems it's actually kind of unlikely, but we all decided to create an organization that would like sort of work on helping like we would leverage our capacity as scientists for like sort of the sovereignty of Armenia, and we would do so by like doing work that protected its biodiversity because we see how biodiversity and like relationship to place are essential in the sort of kind of identity of any like of indigenous people
Yeah.
who are indigenous to a place. And we know like that with colonialism, biodiversity declines. And one of the things that happened during the war, like against Armenia, in Artsakh, was that Azerbaijan used white phosphorus, which is illegal in war,
Yeah.
to burn down like all these forests in Artsakh because people had been hiding in them.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so it was like the sort of this idea. It kind of reminded us of the biblical story, like Solomon with Solomon's wife, like the
Yeah.
splitting, like the baby thing. It's like, well, who would actually want to destroy the land, but someone who's not actually deeply connected to it because they're not like indigenous in the same way. And so you see that for sure also in Palestine. And it's a very common thing, actually, that people who are not native to a place or who are not actively in stewardship of it are very willing to destroy it for political or power, for political gain. Whereas that's less, I mean, it's not that it's never happened the other way, but it's very rare. So anyway, so we have collaborators in Armenia we work with, and we've done surveys of biodiversity, mushroom biodiversity, and we're interested in going this next year to the UN Biodiversity Conference and trying to get sort of like advanced sort of fungal conservation as part of like Armenia's like national sovereignty. So it's a little bit like there's many layers to it, but that's sort of my quickest like way of explaining it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. I mean,
Mhm.
as an American person who watches the news very, very often and is like chronically online, I never heard of that happening in
I
20.
know.
So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, it's part of it's that like there isn't like a clear US stake in this in the conflict,
Mm.
so for better or for worse. So you're not at least you're not getting like terrible propaganda, but you're then just not hearing about it at
Yeah,
all. Yeah.
absolutely. I do want to do a quick time check. We are
Sure.
about 5 minutes till our traditional ending time. Can you go a
Hmm.
few minutes over, or do you have a hard stop time?
I would say hard stop would be at 110 for me. Yeah.
Perfect.
Hmm.
Amazing. So my last burning question, is
Hmm.
there a reaction from a reader that stood out to you?
Um, ooh. I've gotten a few really heartfelt emails.
Mm.
Um, just when people say that like they feel like seen, I guess.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say it's one singular one. I mean, I'm blessed to say that, a lot of people, I've had quite a few very moving emails. Um, just people who like want to share, I've gotten a lot of people who like really open up in the email, and it's not in a way that's like burdensome. It's like in a way that feels like this is like I help them feel something, like articulate something or understand themselves in a way that had always like puzzled and kind of troubled them, and they feel like a relief in having read the book and seeing themselves and having the language now to understand very challenging experiences that they had, mostly usually related to queerness, but also like related to childhood trauma or to the religious element or or like, maybe being feminine, or being a woman or having some sort of feminine experience in navigating the world. So like there are a few different angles to it, but I would say like when people like really tell me that they like are changed by it, that has been like super like moving.
That's
And that's why I wrote it. I wanted people to feel comforted, to feel like they could see themselves in the story. And like there's I don't go on and look for negative reviews. I know that they exist. I've accidentally seen a few where people are like annoyed that there's like a lot of like memoristic elements. But I think that it's worth it because I think that the people that it meant to reach, and I think it actually helps them see themselves in it, and that sort
yeah.
of work, that's the part of the book. I think that the relationship to nature that I'm trying to help people cultivate is deeply personal. So I just
Yeah.
didn't ultimately think there was a way of telling these stories and having that effect without making it by personal, in the writing.
I mean, in defense of the hybrid memoir, I will always say this, people need to shut the fuck up, frankly.
I know.
Um,
Yeah. I also think that it's like there's definitely a fair amount of memoir in it, but it's also like not the majority of the writing. And
no.
so sometimes I'm like a
Yeah.
little baffled by like there have been a couple comments where I'm like, yeah, I mean, yeah, there's memoristic elements, but then there's like pages and pages and pages of other stuff. Like, a lot of other stuff. So I don't
Yeah,
know.
like, did you read the whole thing, babes?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna go to the rapid fire round, short questions,
Great.
short answers. And if anyone on the call has questions for Patricia, we will ask them at the end. Just put them in the chat right now. Okay, what are you currently reading?
I have several books going at once. I have Broken Country. Enjoying that sort of love triangle affair, drama, murder, or
Love.
death. I don't know yet the whole thing. Then I'm also simultaneously reading Martyr by Kaveh Akbar.
Uh,
Yeah, so
um,
really, yeah, enjoying that so far, both of them so far.
what is a book you recommend everyone to read? Like your number one recommended book?
Oh God. It has been Braiding Sweetgrass, but now so many people have read it, so I feel like,
Yeah.
um, oh no. Okay, let me say Braiding Sweetgrass for now, but then
Deal.
let me circle back to that because I
Yeah,
feel like there's
noodle
something.
on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
What is your favorite animal?
Oh, that's so hard too. But I'm gonna immediately just go with frogs.
Love.
Yeah.
What is your favorite plant or like flower?
Ooh, okay. Love Jack in the Pulpits.
Ooh,
Yeah,
I'm gonna
they're
Google
they're
them.
they're they're queer. They're very beautiful. They pop up in the spring. They're kind of ephemeral. And yeah, they remind me like that spring's here and I'm like safe from the winter.
Mhm.
So,
Okay. I already heard you say it, but fungi or fungi? What's your
okay,
argument?
I say fungi, but fungi is not wrong. Fungi is also not wrong.
Oh, I've never heard
So
fungi.
you can, or fungi even. So there's if you go to a mycology conference, you'll hear all four of those pronunciations.
Amazing. Do you have a favorite fungi besides the labules?
Yes, I have this group. It's a genus, so that contains many species.
Huh.
But the genus that I just love because they're like beautiful and they have so many amazing colors is Entoloma. They
And
also have pink spores that are shaped like cubes.
ooh,
But they often have colors that are like pink and purple and blue and orange, and so they're just ugh, they love them. So I love them so much. Yeah,
Pentaloma is like
yeah.
kind of a cunty baby name. Like I kind of love that.
That's hilarious.
If you could have dinner with anyone dead or alive, who would it be? It can also be a dinner party if you want people to be in conversation with one another.
Mm. I would love to have dinner with Cher.
Oh, oh my, I've done over like 40, 50 author interviews and I ask these same questions. No one
Uh-huh.
ever said share. And I'm like,
Oh
aren't you
wow.
gay?
Yeah. I love her so much, and she's also Armenian, so there's
Yes, she
also that.
is.
Yeah, yeah.
Favorite queer movie or TV show?
I mean, the episode in The Last of Us
Mm.
that was between, I forget the characters'
Yeah,
names, but with those two,
Dina and Ellie, right?
yeah. Well, Dina and Ellie, but no, but the men,
Oh,
the
yes.
preppers.
Where they it's Ron Swanson.
Ron Swanson, yeah, and his lover. I don't remember. I'm so bad with
Yeah.
actors' names or
Yeah, no,
characters'
I
names,
am
but
too. That
that episode was some of the better, like some really good gay TV. I really like that. And then I'm also watching. I also like. Oh fuck. The L Word, obviously.
oh
I
yeah.
love. Yeah.
That episode of The Last of Us. So my dad is a massive Linda Ronstadt fan. Like I have
Uh-huh.
so many of her vinyls from him. And Long, Long Time was like my number three song
Oh
on my
wow.
Spotify Wrapped this year, just because I listen to it like every single day. It's
Oh
my one of
wow.
my favorites, even before the show, for the record.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, and then finally, favorite queer influencer or celebrity or someone to follow on social media.
Hmm. Well, I love Patagonia. Yeah, they are, if, for those who don't, probably a lot of you know, but they're a drag queen that does like a lot of environmental activism, and they just are so cool. And they've been, they receive so much hate and so much like violent like threats and everything, and they've even been like, like mentioned. I think Trump has even specifically like targeted them, and so but they just haven't let up. They're so out there with they unabashed queer and trans advocacy, and they're like super like they also like they're super ripped and they're amazing. Like they're so good at hiking and everything, and they do it all in drag, and it's just amazing. It's just incredible.
Oh my God, I need the patties to go on a hike together
That would be amazing.
and
We
like
did
do
actually
mushrooms.
meet because I was on an episode. They had a TV show that came out recently with Bonnie Wright, the former Ginny Weasley, and
Oh,
they had me on a panel, so I did get to meet Patty. Yeah,
I love that.
yeah.
Okay, so we have a few questions in the chat.
Hmm.
Emma asks, what stories were a part of your childhood that impacted the way you look at and write about the world today?
Hmm. Oh, stories from my child. Frog and Toad. Definitely
Yes.
was a big Frog and Toad fan. I mean, I didn't, I guess, I don't know. I'll have to like think more about that. I don't have, and I don't know if this is like a little bit of a trauma thing, but I don't have, aside from my memories of nature, I actually struggle to remember a lot of my early childhood. And that's something that I've been puzzling over for my whole life. So but I do remember, but I've always, I always just, I think like, so in terms of books, I have to think more about it. I definitely just watched a lot of nature shows though. I love PBS, like nature, like or Discovery Channel nature. And so I was just like really obsessed with just the way other animals live their lives. And I felt like that was like really important for me to like give myself permission to be sort of not like conform to a lot of like social
Yeah.
structure.
I maintain that this is for the Animal Planet kids. I was the most extreme crocodile hunter girly growing
Oh,
up,
I love
so
that.
I relate to that. Sophia says, I don't even know if this is a question you can answer, but you talk a lot about the intersexuality of nature, and yet so many still talk about the gender binary is just simple biology. Do you think there's a
Mhm.
way to inform people about the queerness of nature who don't want to listen to the truth? That's the
Hmm.
question.
It's hard. Like when I feel like there's different strategies I deploy in different settings. So am I talking to a distant like, extended family member who's like kind of whose relationship I have some sort of stake in and I want to be very patient and slow and deliberate? Or is this like online or, like it kind of depends like the strat and like how good faith the person is that, you're engaging with. Um, there are very clear biological graphs and stuff that show like the spectrum of sexuality genetically, that are actually pretty easy to understand. Now I have a friend who like sort of studies misinformation and does a lot of workshops on like getting people to like understand complex like sort of like climate change or things that have like both social and political layers in addition to science or fact-based information. And the kind of data shows that people don't actually really respond to facts unless they're really looking for them. So unless they're like setting out to learn, giving people facts often doesn't change their mind. So sometimes like, and I've encountered this as well, like I feel like Tommy Loren or someone like, oh yeah, I was invited on Piers Morgan's show one time. I declined. I kind of wanted to do it though, but all my people in my life were like, don't do it, don't do it. They're gonna be so mean to you. And they definitely would have been mean to me. But it was supposed to be with Tommy Loren, and we were gonna debate like queerness in nature.
Oh my
Um, and I and I
God.
and I was like, they're just gonna shift the goalposts every time, right? So
Every
like,
time.
they're not gonna like. I could come prepared with a billion facts, and they're going to not. That's not the point,
Yeah.
right? So it kind of depends. If they're engaging in good faith, I would use the facts. I would show them graphs about how like like genetically like sex is a spectrum, and like yes, people do tend to cluster, in like in a sort of binaristic way, but there are like all sorts of ways to be in between, and it's not a true binary. But if people are not engaging in good faith, then it kind of depends on what you want to get out of the situation. Do you want to make yourself feel better in the moment? Sometimes that's valid. Do you want to like just give them the information and let them have them make the choice? I've increasingly though, I find it more and more important to not just get in a like very hostile conversation. Like I try to be really nice to people, and give them the benefit of the doubt and talk to them as if they have something that they're trying to understand themselves, and maybe they don't feel seen in a particular way, and I try to help them feel seen in that conversation without compromising my values or like the ultimate goal of like getting, addressing something like hateful. So it's a strategy thing.
Yeah.
Depends.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And I agree. It depends on the person and what you want out of the situation.
Yeah. Hmm.
Last question. Leah asks, I was so excited to find your book because I'm currently writing my master's thesis on queer ecology in
Yay.
environmental education. Thank you for writing it. So my question is,
Awesome.
what responses have people had to queer ecology in academic settings?
That's awesome that you're doing that. That's so exciting. And feel free to, shoot me an email or something, and when it's done, I'd love to read your thesis. I would say that it's a mix, but there's a lot of enthusiasm for it. Certainly in the younger generation, like I'm 34, and so my age, people younger, like there's a lot of enthusiasm for it. I think I haven't, dealt with like most of the like backlash has been at like not in my direct sphere, right? So like again, being invited on that invitation not to be on Piers Morgan came after I was in a documentary called Queer Planet, which is on Peacock. It's
I
great, I
watched
recommend
it.
it. Yeah, so that was like, because so that came out and was like on TMZ and all sorts of stuff, that so my book has not generated that level of scrutiny. But I would say that for the most part, there's a lot of energy behind it. There's a lot of people are like yearning for connectivity to nature, to have like a deep relationship to the species around them, and to like sort of understand that the world is weirder and more complex than a lot of people, would have you believe. So I think people who are scientists, there is like a lot of scientists are actually quite reasonable, right? So like there are these stories of scientific information being suppressed because like about the gay seagulls, and throughout the history of science, like a lot of the studies around queerness in nature were suppressed because of because of homophobia, or because of the like these things. But I think most times when you meet a scientist, they will change their mind in the face of good data. Like that's a thing, and a lot of like scientists are trained to be like that, and it's that like been becoming a scientist sort of selects for that kind of person often. So I think I wouldn't feel too concerned about it. I think there's energy for it.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. I had so much fun talking to
This
you.
was great,
And
Nina. Yeah,
yeah,
you're awesome. It's really easy talking to you, and it just fun to have this conversation. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Of course. And yeah, I hope everyone on the call has a wonderful rest of your Sunday, and we'll catch you on Discord and YouTube.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Have a good one.